Good afternoon. This is Spider of Crescendo Games. Just making a little video as I drive home. So, one of the things that has been going around the interwebs lately um, is the concept of, dice rolling and how people, how people have a hard time interacting with the rules of a role playing game and how players don't seem to care about rules and that there's all these people that are actually kind of problematic to the space. I'm oversimplifying it, of course, because I don't want to entirely be about that conversation itself beyond offering my response or sort of my critique to it. And I don't really agree with that premise. I don't agree with the premise that players don't want to learn rules in a role playing game. Um, I don't think that that's the case because most of the players that I've met who have been slow to learn rules inside of role playing games are actually the ones that I've met that have been really, really, really slow about it, or years later they go, wait, what dice am I rolling again? Um, Everybody has that player, right? Everybody has that player where they're like, it's 5 years in and they still don't know that you roll a d20 for dice checks inside of D&D. They still don't know to pick up a d20 for attack rolls or whatever. Everybody has that. Um, all the people that I've met that have had that kind of problem, or at least the vast majority of them, are actually extremely intelligent people. Um, and so it kind of got me thinking as to why that seems to be a thing. And what I think it comes down to is that role playing games are a more abstract form of play. And so it's hard for people to get into a rhythm that other games just do very, very naturally. So, like, let's take, for instance, Monopoly, everybody's favorite game that they love to rag on. Monopoly is extremely simple. You pick up two six-sided dice, you roll them, you sum up you sum the two dice, and then you move your guy that many spaces, and then you see if you can buy the property or not. That's really, really, really dirt simple. I'm sorry, but it is. And it's not actually all that more complicated than a role playing game. At least on paper. On paper, it's not any more complicated. It even has you referencing an external source to see what happens with your roll. It's not all that different on paper. However, there is an additional factor or series of factors that are not being accounted for by most role-playing game rules. I say most because we're going to get to that. And the simple fact of the matter is that inside of Monopoly, you only have to worry about the board and your money. There's not like these are things that are right in front of you. They're very, very concrete. They're right there. You don't have to stash them into your memory. You don't have to, memorize how much money you have. Matter of fact, I can't remember how much money I have in Monopoly whenever I'm playing it. I actually have to pick up the damn cash and rifle through it. So, whatever that says, right? But in a role-playing game, it's mostly an abstracted conversation where everybody is trying to keep track of all of these fictionalized abstract objects. And that is a whole level of complexity that actually is not very easy for people to do. It's not like, yeah, sure, as kids, people are playing cops and robbers or, whatever. Some people are. Some people aren't, though. it's not nearly as universal as people think it is. Um, and especially after a certain point in development, it's definitely not. It's definitely becomes a skill that people have to develop after a certain point, and a lot of people don't. So when they come back to it via role playing, they're essentially having to keep track of this mental abstraction that isn't necessarily a very like easy thing to do. And um, because of that, yeah, sure, people are going to lose track of things that don't fit a natural rhythm. Now, somebody is going to go, well, hold up, you know, you narrate until the GM tells you to roll in most of these games. What's so complex about that? Actually, that's really, really, really complicated. Um, it's not complicated because people are dumb. It's complicated because it then becomes a game of Mother May I, right? Um, it becomes a game of you tell the GM what he wants to hear, and if he likes what he hears, you don't roll. And if he doesn't, and if he finds what you say to be, big and troublesome, you then pick up dice. That switches into a completely different game mode for people. They're switching from the abstract over to picking up dice to then rolling, and I mean it's actually a lot more work than it sounds. And unless you have what's actually, in my opinion, a very complicated series of mental actions, unless you put that down into like a constant rhythm, you know, people are not going to track that all that well. It's not a question of what's up here, it's a question of like heartbeat. Um, so games that do this right, ironically enough, are are actually crunchier games. I went and I when I was playing Axe with one of my coworkers, he has a hard time knowing what to roll. So all I told him was every single time we're in, and anytime you have to pick up something, unless I tell you different, it's a D20, right? And so we're in the middle of playing, and Axe has all of these it codifies, and a lot of OSR games actually of the older variety codify. Um, they actually codify um, rolling more often, and so because you're rolling more often, and because most things require a roll in older games, I've actually seen people who have difficulty with this sort of stuff actually lose that. And it's not hard to figure out why at that point, because the they go and they shorten up their descriptions a little bit more. They only really describe or narrate what they think they need to in order to keep the mental load at a certain point. This isn't like wargaming, where where you are in the numbers all the time. The rhythm of the game includes these numbers, whereas a lot of role-playing games will stick on an entirely different skill set in, and then people have to shift between these two modes. So from what I've seen, you have to stick with a certain rhythm to keep people learning the rules. The rules have to have something that everybody um, can follow as a part of just turning off their brain and going with it. Not saying you can't put complexity into the game, because I mean, I just used Axe as an example. I mean, Axe is not exactly a simple game at all. Quite the opposite. Um, but instead, as long as it is as long as the game has a consistent rhythm, then it's going to work out okay. In my opinion, this blows up a lot of games. A lot of games all of a sudden are disqualified by this. The narrate until you're forced to roll cycle is not a rhythm. It's Mother May I. And and that poses a huge problem for a lot of people. It's not insurmountable. There's ways to incentivize, there's incentivizations you can give to get people to create their own little loop. But at that point, you're having to construct it. You're having to deal with the fact that you are doing something that isn't really that natural to people. And I'm not saying that people are stupid or anything like that. I'm just saying that when people play games, they look for a procedure to do. And if that procedure is narrow, and if that procedure is just talking to a judge or a game master or whatever, there's your rhythm. That's it. And if that procedure includes a short little description and then you roll a die, okay, well, cool. There's your loop. But talking until you're told to roll is not actually a loop. It's a loop that's been interrupted, and it makes it difficult for people to follow. Now, again, there's ways to there's ways to get around this problem. You make dice rolling a part of everything, at which point, cool, eventually it gets ground into the person's nervous system. Okay, I say what I do and I pick up a die. You could make it like in my game Crescendo, where you narrate with the Weaver until the Weaver tells you an outcome that you don't like, at which point you have the option to defy him. I've noticed that works really well, because at that point, that's a loop that everybody can understand. You go until you don't like it, and that's when you pick up a dice. That sticks into a primal, that sticks into a primal loop that people can understand very quickly. But it's really difficult to do the middle path. The middle path is difficult. And it's the path that a lot of role-playing games have picked because people are not designing for other people. They're designing for what they think sounds right. Now, there's going to be someone who responds to this going, well, that's not how it works in my game. Okay, good for you. I'm glad you think so. And I'm glad that you've had players who are able or willing, whichever, to adapt. But most people I've met and played with are not like that. Most of them want a loop that they can intuit at a glance and then play with. If that loop includes complications like math and rolling dice and all this other stuff, it'll take them a little bit longer to learn it. But the first element is whether or not they can just turn on an automatic sequence into the back of their head. This is what makes wargaming work. There's wargamers I follow now who make fun of theater kids. Theater kids are real. I'm not one of them. But, they'll make fun of theater kids for not being able to do subtraction in their role-playing games. When you go to a war game and you're like, oh my God, look at all this stuff here. I can follow that just fine, just for the record. The problem is that they're not marking the loop shift that has to happen between narrating and trying to stay inside of an abstract fiction, and then picking up dice and turning on another part of the brain that most people have to turn off in order to play the role-playing game in the first place. So, and I think earlier editions of D&D and other older games actually bear me out here. They prove my point. You're rolling all the time inside of BX. You're rolling all the time for all sorts of actions. Um, and earlier editions of D&D actually thread this needle really nicely, because you know that there's a dice coming as a part of the narration. You can bank on it. You can rely on it on a basic gut level. You know that the thing that you're talking about doing will require some form of dice roll. It's gonna require it. And sometimes you may need a little bit of help figuring out which one that is. Okay, that's fine. And because goodness knows AD&D doesn't have nearly, or BX doesn't have as much of a neat and clean resolution system as people would think they like. Anyway, if you can construct a loop inside of your design that allows people to bridge the right brain, left brain jump that you have to make when math rocks are added in, that is going to be really, really, really powerful. It's going to be very, very helpful. AD&D does this by having the game do a lot of rolling, which keeps you inside of your left brain, or inside your more analytical side, and then it has you narrate as a part of knowing that dice come out. Crescendo, my game, flips that on its head. Instead, you are narrating and you're staying very, very much inside of the intuitive side until you have decided that enough is enough and you need to change things. At which point, you now are essentially the dice jump in when you are disrupting things. It is a disruptive change. And so dice are then associated with disruption, which is perfect because that's what you're doing. And so people can jump over a little bit more because in their heads, they already have a concept for, I'm changing things up. Okay, cool. Things have been changed up. I've also found that one of the things that can help with this kind of problem is incentivizing rolling dice, or incentivizing learning math through random outcome. So how many people here have gone to a casino and just found someone sitting at the slot machines? Like, people get addicted. It's an addictive loop. If you do the same thing and get a different result every time, people want to keep doing it. It excites them. And most dice rolling mechanics are actually really, really, really boring. Their outcomes are boring. You either get it or you don't. This is fine in more old school games because you expect to roll. You're not disrupting anything. Hey, this is just part of playing the game. However, if you're going to make rolling more disruptive in most newer games, you have to put a kicker on there that's randomized. Crescendo does this as well, on top on top of roles being player initiated and thus a disruption in of themselves, there's a reset at the end where you randomly determine where the plot goes because you rolled. So every time someone picks up the dice inside of Crescendo, where they know that, they know they're shaking the table, so to speak, the table flips and resets. And it does it in a somewhat random manner, which means that instead of being like, well, I'm picking up the dice, I either make it or I don't, it's I pick up the dice and I legitimately don't know what happens or what is going to happen. Which brings us back to that slot machine analogy again. If you pick up the dice and if something unexpected happens as a result of picking up the dice, that's cool. Most modern RPGs, because they don't do this, they don't provide a powerful enough incentive to learn. You actually have to incentivize this kind of thing. You actually have to learn how the human brain works, and then you have to learn how to hack it. And you can either make the learning of the dice and of the rules part of a normal gameplay loop, or you can incentivize it through well through randomized outcomes, which most game design doesn't do. And because it doesn't do it, you still have people 5 years into a game still going, I'm sorry, what dice am I picking up again?